these few words. As he said, we know each other for more than 30 years. In fact, he knows me more than I know him because first day when I had to rag him in college, he was the one who walked up to me. Actually, I didn't rag him. Finally, he ended up ragging me. As a senior, Hari and me have a very strange relationship in that form. Secondly, Bhaskar, no doubt. Srinath also. Though Bhaskar, I got to know only after getting into the profession, but all three have been so great in the profession, and I think HSB hasn't looked behind after they started it. And it's nice that I'm part of this 15-year annual lecture series. My privilege to address not just the firm, but all the participants, the colleagues who work, and other friends also have joined today. Now, one of the main reasons I jumped on the offer of Bhaskar was the reason that this helps us to not just share what, according to you all, things we know. It also helped me to compile and read more if we choose any topic which we need to address. And one thing what I found was even before just when the lockdown happened and when the beginning part of it was there, we were finding that we need to do something academic. So in my office with my colleagues, I ended up doing a kind of a coordinated effort so that we can have all the case laws or the decisions of various tribunals and appellate tribunal in regard to both IBC and Companies Act, not exactly compiled, but for our awareness purposes. So when Bhaskar requested me, I said, let me talk both on company law and ABC together for about an hour and a half or so. As I ended up preparing it, the subject became so vast that roughly the case laws, what I'm going to touch today alone, will touch about 75 to 80 case laws on various issues. And I decided and I requested Bhaskar, can you permit me to only present on Companies Act for the moment? And maybe I can do one more session on IBC at a later point in time, subject to your timing in the series. Maybe next week or so if the lockdown continues or so. I just wish it does or doesn't. It's left to each one's, I would say, interests and impressions. But for the present, I've decided to compile, or rather the whole team, thanks to many of my colleagues who have also joined here, compile these decisions, which are absolutely going to be useful for us in our day-to-day practice. Preparation of either litigation, restructuring, or schemes as such. So this is what I'm trying to share. The second point I'm trying to make here is, the slide may look a bit long. I may not read it fully, but I'm going to share all the slides with the HSB through either Bhaskar or Hari to ensure that you don't need to look up these points by going through the case law as such, because they are quite, I would say, crisp in such a way that the whole finding as such would be there. That's one of the reasons why I didn't try to make it in a single line or a bullet form to ensure that it takes away the whole message or the point which I'm trying to make. So that is the important, I think, feature which I wanted to explain rather than you thinking that such a big slide has been, I would say, typed out or printed out as such. The third one and the last one which I request you all is, I know that many of the best of the speakers have been giving you all the lectures. Well, I always like to say, like how Theodore Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy. I just want to enjoy this presentation. I only request you all not to compare either before me or after me. In whatever way I have kind of faltered, please pardon me. I will try to do my best in regard to explaining these case laws. One important request also I would like to make is in this particular screen, the chat is coming in the center of the page for me. So I will now and then look at the chat and answer any questions if you all have, or if you would like to make it a question immediately, please unmute and ask me then and there if required, or you can also wait till I finish the presentation and ask me at the end. I'm absolutely open to taking questions as and when you feel like, or at the end also. But if it comes on the chat, I will be seeing every few slides or so and not continuously I'll be watching the chat. That's the only request I'm making. So to begin with, this presentation, as I said, would relate to schemes of amalgamation, demerger, reduction of capital, and other forms of arrangement compromises. and then other general provisions of the 2013 Act in relation to oppression, mismanagement, and we have one or two on restoration of companies also. Now, judgment in relation, I'm firstly going into 230 and 232, maybe reduction of capital because of that 66. Firstly, I would like to give one or two judgments from the Supreme Court. Now, these all have been collected virtually from the either reported or unreported sources or the websites of the respective benches or the Supreme Court website also. The first one I'm starting in is in regard to an income tax decision itself in the case of Dalmia Power. The Supreme Court granted permission to the appellant to file the revised return of income tax due to an enabling clause in the scheme. Now, the most important thing was, which was never objected to by the income tax department when notices were served during the pendency of the scheme. The condonation process post expiry of the time period of the filing a revised return, which is a normal process of law, was held not to be necessary as the reasons for delay in filing the IT return was a pendency of the amalgamation. This would also help in schemes wherein the appointed date is retrospective and pending before jurisdictional adjudicating authority. So you will find three important points. The first one was when we send the statutory notices to the regulators, if this judgment brings out a very important principle that if they don't respond and they didn't object, then they cannot bring it back later, is what Supreme Court has found. So as of now, many of the regulators have been taking an appeal without doing so. Indirectly, this helps to ensure that either they must object at the first instance or if not so. The second was it will not be treated as a delay for filing the revised return because the amalgamation was still pending. Reading along with that is the appointed date. Here, the appointed date of the scheme would have been a date prior to the date of the filing of the amalgamation. Maybe it could have been as 1/4/2019, here in 20 April. March accounts might not have been over, so it would have gone 1 year back, or any date prior. So the pendency of that appointed date itself makes it a ground that a revised return is generally not necessary, but if you want to file also, they can't object. So this is very both on tax law as well as also on the power of the regulator. This is a very good important judgment. It further says that there is second one is whether an order under 396 of the Companies Act 56 be subject to judicial challenge on constitutional grounds. This was the challenge against the Bombay High Court's order, where 63 Moons Technology Limited, which partly started in regard to the 241 proceedings from Madras High Court, from the NCLT Chennai also. Parallelly, an amalgamation was ordered in national interest by the Department of Ministry of Company Affairs. It was taken by the companies to 63 Moons Technology to the Bombay High Court, and against the Bombay High Court judgment, it went up to Supreme Court. Supreme Court in this judgment dealt with the applicability and construction of 396, which deals with compulsory amalgamation of companies by a central government order on grounds of public interest. Now, the relevant portion is the central government order ultimately makes a specific direction where the two specific companies which are to be amalgamated. One important point is they said that even a 396 order must conform to Article 14 and 19(1)(g) of the Constitution. That is right to equality and right to carry on free trade, commerce and business. Now, the various prerequisites contained in the section must first be satisfied. Now, the word satisfied for the central government means that it must on certain objective facts come to a conclusion that amalgamation between two or more companies is necessary. This can only be done if the central government finds it essential, that is necessary to do so. No doubt, there were amalgamations earlier also under the 56 Act, meaning under 396, which is equivalent to the present section also. But still, because this started in the old Act, 396 I'm referring to is the Companies Act of 1956, not the 2013 Act, because it started in the previous enactment. So that was taken into account. They also took into account the importance from the notes on clauses, the fact that it is only occasionally that cases arise where an amalgamation is in national interest is clearly a necessity. They also brought about what are the definitions of 396(3), 3A and 4. What are the condition precedents? The interests of the shareholders had to be heard. The interests of the creditors regarding the compensation which has to be heard. And then also with regard to the order of such an assessment of an appeal is provided under 3(A) regarding the compensation as such. We considered all these provisions. They gave the various ones. I will just take you through the bullets. Natural justice. Suggestions which are given in regard to this must first be considered with regard to the objections raised. Objections, suggestions from the shareholders and creditors. Then ultimately, it is to be why the government comes to a decision based on the condition precedents understood in the basis of the law. They further go on to also give one or two other considerations regarding the body of persons who are properly instructed to say that it is an essential one for the amalgamation of public interest, satisfactory opinion, and also that if you do not go to 396, it is impossible to do this in national interest also has to be made out. Then they also have to test whether it is in the selfish interest or is it in public interest. Public interest here is a nice interesting view which I want to just point out. It would mean that the combining of resources of two or more companies so as to impact production and consumption of goods and services and employment of personnel relatable thereto for the general benefit of the community. Conversely, any action that impedes promotion of industry or obstructs growth, which is a national interest or public interest, would run counter to public interest as mentioned in this section. And I would, I just missed out one particular slide also, which was in the beginning. And they ultimately conclude by saying there is no doubt whatsoever that 396 cannot be challenged on the ground that Article 14 or 19 given under 31A is violated. You can say it does not mean that 396 cannot be construed as arbitrary or leading to unreasonable results. So you can challenge on that ground is what they've said. So the central government's objection on that ground was not accepted. Ultimately, anyway, they did set aside and hold in favor of the company. The general rule as such, they said they cannot make also in what situations it can directly impact or not impact the creditors or the shareholders, and they left it to the facts of each case. Then this was another interesting judgment of the Delhi High Court. For reopening of assessment in respect of a transfer company now merged with a transferee, whom should the notice go to? No doubt we do have a judgment of the Madras High Court in T.V. Sundaramayangar and Sons was a CIT. It's a reported decision. But still, in the context of the present law, they were very clear that as a successor in interest, if there is no requirement to issue two separate notices, the amalgamating company's notice can go to the amalgamated company itself, since everything has been taken over with assets and liabilities by the amalgamated company, and as it has accrued to the individual company, that is a transfer in its individual capacity also. So therefore, the notice being sent to the transferee company is sufficient for reopening of assessment proceedings. So it was an objection taken by the transferee company that the transferor only ought to have been issued notice, but the Delhi High Court held otherwise. Then group properties and regulatory approval. Suppose a group comes. Now this was a scheme again by the Delhi High Court under 391, which was pending, and the liquidation was pending as early as 2006-07. So during the pendency of liquidation, the promoters wanted the permission of the Delhi High Court to discuss a settlement with the creditors for an arrangement under 391. But while the liquidation was pending, and as well as also negotiations were going on, there was another proceeding initiated before NCLT, wherein a CRP also was initiated. No doubt the company, how I would put it, though liquidation was there, it is quite surprising that a CRP was initiated, and the CRP usually is initiated only against a company which is alive, meaning that no liquidation is pending. But here when they went, the company court granted a stay in a writ petition, and the CRP was made subject to the orders of the company court and NCLAT or whatever, but the judgment does read in this form. Now, when the scheme comes up for hearing, it is finally sanctioned under 391 by the Delhi High Court. Now, in that order, the group properties of the other group companies were also utilized to square off various liabilities. Compliance under RERA was held not as a bar. Then the creditor's approval, the majority present in person holding 3/4 in value was felt as sufficient. The real estate allottees were also treated as a class of creditors under 391 since there was commonality of interest. Now, this is a very strange scheme where both the NCLT and 391 were involved, but presently it may not be applicable because at that point in time, the arrangement application was pending in a high court. Now, practically speaking, when a company is in liquidation, how a CIRP process was initiated against them is a fact we must see. Was that the ground for staying also the proceedings? But today it may not be academically possible to consider this particular situation, but it was sanctioned after the IBC came into effect on 15/12/2016. Then recall of an application, can it be made? Is it equal to a review? Now, a scheme was sanctioned. Under Rule 9, an objector came seeking an application to recall instead of an appeal under 391(7). Now, the recall application was dismissed on merits, and the Delhi High Court said that a recall application was equivalent to review, and hence the appeal itself could not be maintained. But one point I would like to make is this judgment can be used to differentiate a review or recall in cases where the order is to be recalled. Other Supreme Court judgments on differentiation of review and recall were also discussed in the judgment. You can look at that. In essence, an application for recall of a scheme dismissed on merits cannot be appealed. Now, this may not again apply to the present situation because we know that an order passed by the NCLT is still an appealable one to the NCLAT. That doesn't mean that the scheme cannot be done. 391 was a separate code in itself. 391(7) provided for an appeal against a scheme. Here, now under the Companies Act 2013, NCLT can hear all appeals against NCLAT can hear all appeals against NCLT, and there is no specific one for the mergers alone. So academically, I've just placed it to understand the meaning of review versus recall. So can we go for a recall? No, you must go for an appeal in the present situation. Now I take you to judgments of NCLAT in regard to the same restructuring proposal. Firstly, in regard to 90% shareholder consent sufficient for dispensation of meeting. This Aloe Vera Trade Link is an interesting judgment because consent affidavits were filed through representatives of the company. Later, individual consent letters of all shareholders are placed on record, but were never taken into consideration by the adjudicating authority. The appellate tribunal, on view of the consent of the shareholders, dispensed with the meeting. It is noteworthy to take into consideration that consent of all shareholders were not filed for dispensation. Consent for shareholders above 90% was considered sufficient for purpose of dispensation. It's a strange situation. Whether it will apply to our bench, we don't know in Chennai. Here, even if we give 100, some of the benches don't consider dispensation. But with shareholders' consent, there is an NCLAT decision which says that you can dispense it, and they went with 90% itself. Then threshold for objection, not bar for tribunal to inspect the scheme. We all know that it's sufficient if 5% of creditors or 10% of members, if they make an objection, that threshold, only then they are duty bound to see that all procedures are followed and the scheme is conscionable. But then the appellate tribunal held, irrespective of these threshold prescribed, the tribunal is duty bound to see all are duty are, you can see if they are able to answer reasonably, then they reject that the 10% was not there. Here in this particular case, the appellate tribunal held that the issues raised by anybody, even if not eligible or otherwise, the tribunal will have a duty to look into the issue to see whether the scheme is just, fair, conscionable, and reasonable from the point of a prudent man of business taking commercial decision beneficial to the class. So we just like that cannot take an objection on the threshold. This AT also further went into what is the meaning of a class. The last one in regard to whether the shareholding ratio has to be reworked. The AT therefore set aside and said the sanction and rather sanctioned the order passed by the adjudicating authority. It said a de novo would not be necessary, and the shares were being cancelled. If you can see the last bullet, the scheme did not provide payment for the shareholders whose shares were cancelled, and such payment was offered only upon intervention by the adjudicating authority. The valuation would need to be reworked and the scheme would need to be initiated de novo. Hence, the AT set aside the sanction, ordered and the sanction order passed by the adjudicating authority. So they had to start afresh. Now, scheme sufficient instrument for stamping. There was a point taken whether there was a specific instrument which need to be made for stamping or not. This was, I think, in a separate application which was considered by the adjudicating authority. The NCLAT said there is no separate application or a document which needs to be prepared for presenting before the stamping authorities. And the appeal was filed pleading that the approved scheme itself would be sufficient. I think the adjudicating authority which rejected, on appeal, the AT set aside, holding that there is no requirement for any additional documents for registering the transfer of assets. Then Rule 16 regarding the registered office. Companies had the registered office at Gurgaon and Transferee had at New Delhi. The NCLT New Delhi dismissed. I think I can continue. Yeah.
Yes.
The NCLT New Delhi bench dismissed the application filed by the transferee company stating lack of jurisdiction because it said it can't accept both. The appellate tribunal considered a question of law as to where an application under 230-232 is to be filed when registered offices are located between two different jurisdictional benches. The AT disposed of the appeal, holding that by invoking Rule 16D, where cases warrant circumstances, the president under 16D can transfer one of the case from one bench to the other where the matter is pending, including the cases where the transferor and transferee are at different places of the country. Now, this was a classic case because both Gurgaon and Delhi are very close by. Therefore, they brought it. Now, we need to bring out very valid reasons to show why Bombay and Chennai or Chennai and Bangalore, you need to move towards one jurisdiction. But to move from one bench to another bench, an appellate tribunal has held is possible with the president invoking Rule 16D. Then dispensation of meeting in the DLF phase case. Now, this is a classic case you will find where an appeal against an order declining dispensation to the meeting of shareholders and creditors. Main reason was, in view of the foregoing and all relevant consideration as also the settled law on the subject, the impugned order falling within the purview of per inquiria is supported. The tribunal should have applied its mind in the light of judicial precedents brought to its notice by way of an affidavit, and even the views expressed by the coordinate or larger benches being squarely applicable followed the same. One principle is, as of now, we are not able to place coordinate bench judgments before another bench and rely on. They treat it as persuasive value. This finding helps that other benches' judgments are also kind of highly persuasive if we have to place before them. The AT remanded the matter for fresh consideration of the first motion application, having regard to the settled position of law of dispensation with shareholder and creditor meetings. Now, practically whether we'll be able to do it or not is another point. But then what I would like to say is you can treat other benches' judgments also as of highly persuasive value is what that judgment said. Then discretion of company to discharge consideration. The Hyderabad bench dismissed the scheme on the ground that the provisions of 230 and 232 do not provide for allotment of shares at a premium. I would call this as a very stray case because the law provides for allotment of shares. So allotment of shares, we have always had pre-56, I would rather say the 56 Act and post-56. It can be done for a premium. And the AT just said this in one line. It is a prerogative of the company to issue shares at a premium or otherwise, depending upon the facts and circumstances of the situation. Here, the fair value, how it was acquired to, and the difference being carried to a securities premium account, that was dealt with. But the bench held, no, you can't issue shares at all at a premium. That principle was set aside. Now, 242 order for reduction does not dispense with statutory compliances. Though it was in regard to a scheme, the AT, while setting aside the order of the adjudicating authority, held that the order passed by the adjudicating authority under 242 for cancellation of shares requires the mandatory compliance of SEBI Act except the provisions of 100 to 102. Because that was a listed company in BSE Limited as RICO. The BSE objected to it and said that SEBI's requirement was necessary. They said 100 to 102 was not required, similar to the 402 under the previous act. But SEBI's regulation compliances and its directions had to be complied with, and set aside the order of the adjudicating authority which had ordered irrespective of those regulations. The interim order required the mandatory compliance of this particular issue. Strict compliance of merger rules, NCLT directed appellant to approach High Court. Now, this is a case where it was pending even prior to the 2013 Act. So, an application was filed in the Delhi High Court for directions for meetings. Pursuant to such directions, meetings were not being able to be conducted in the time specified, and another application was filed before the Honorable Delhi High Court. During this time, the provisions of 2013 Act came in pertaining to 230, and consequently, the application filed before the Delhi High Court was withdrawn, and an application was filed before the NCLT. This application was dismissed as it was not presented as per dispensation requirement under 2013 Act, because we all know that dispensation you require the 90% consideration for creditors. A review was also filed but was dismissed before the principal bench. The AT in the present case said, we allow you to bring the facts and also go back to the High Court with the request to entertain those applications as it was preferred before it, and therefore the High Court itself can be approached for this purpose. So the appellate tribunal allowed them to move the Delhi High Court. So I'm bringing it academically here because it may not be relevant at the moment, but the point is the tribunal was insisting on the compliance of the 2013 Act, that is 90% for dispensation. Then the transferee holding company dispensation was not allowed here in this case. An appeal was filed against an order of NCLT wherein no dispensation of meeting of shareholders and creditors were granted to transferee, wherein under the scheme, the wholly owned subsidiary of the transferee was to be amalgamated. On rejecting the appeal, the tribunal held 233 referred to initially by NCLT as a speedier process. Now, because this was a case of a fast track or the small companies merger. If appellant, keeping in view subsection 14, preferred to resort to 232, the applicants cannot be faulted. Only thing is that then they have to go through the procedure under 232. 232 gives a power to NCLT to consider and decide calling of meeting of creditors. So the dispensation from 233, if it was to come under 232, you may have to do the whole process is what the tribunal felt. It further went on to add, appellant cannot claim dispensing meeting as a matter of right. When it is a question of merger and provisions require and give discretion to the NCLT with regard to calling of meeting, it is a discretion to be exercised judiciously by the NCLT. NCLT is duty bound to follow procedure laid down by law, and the NCLT record reasons why it finds that calling a meeting is necessary, and we do not find that the reasons recorded are arbitrary. The law provides that NCLT has exercised discretion that the meetings are required to be called. We do not wish to substitute our discretion over the discretion of the NCLT. So therefore, you will find if the NCLT for reasons to be recorded convenes meeting, even if you have the 90% or for reasons otherwise, then the NCLT did not interfere and they can still force us to call meetings. Now, role of regulators. This was a chit fund case. A scheme came to be dismissed as there was no approval from the Registrar of Chits, and the sanction of the scheme could not have been made subject to its approval. The AT set aside the impugned order, consequently directing the adjudicating authority to dispose of the matter within 3 months and to pass appropriate order sanctioning the scheme with such condition as may be required under any law, including approval under chit funds. So the precondition to get the approval was set aside and said, you please make it a conditional approval or such other protection as you may deem fit of other law or Chit Fund Act also. So a regulator not having given a consent does not mean that the scheme is to be dismissed. It can be made a conditional approval. That is the point made in this Shriram's Chits case. Then 231 exercised on appeal. The adjudicating authority closed the company petitions on the ground that modification to the scheme would require the consent of shareholder creditors, which would also be compliance of Section 66 of the Companies Act. The adjudicating authority also held that the scheme cannot be revived due to efflux of time, as a time period as mentioned in the scheme has expired. So the power under 231, that is to modify a scheme, is still there, but under what situation it is left to the adjudicating authority to decide. But on appeal, the tribunal, in view of the express power under 231(1)(b), held that it was open to the tribunal to sanction the scheme if necessary by exercising its power to modify the scheme. It is exactly equivalent to 392. The AT approved the scheme with modification and also permitted the appellant to have a long stop date. In essence, the modification of the scheme and the extension of this date disallowed the authority by in view of the provisions of 231. So, though it could have remanded the matter back to the tribunal, it still held it and sanctioned with the modification in the appeal itself. Now, arrangement to include reduction. Note that the provision now permits under 230 clause 6 that you can sanction. The original scheme was dismissed that the reduction had to undergo as per 66. On appeal, the impugned order was set aside by the AT because of the explanation below Section 230 provides for a reduction also. The AT further held, I would like to read the last bullet alone. In view of the aforesaid provisions, we hold that the tribunal failed to notice the explanation below Section 230, which makes it clear that even for reduction of share capital effected in pursuance, the provisions of 66 shall not apply. Now, since there are no questions till now, I'm not answering anything now. I'm just continuing. Treatment of income tax disputes under a scheme. Now, this will help us very well because before the appellate tribunal, the question was whether tribunal could impose a condition to make payment of alleged tax liabilities when the same are disputed by the company before concerned authorities and make it a precondition to sanctioning the scheme, more so when no such demand has been made by the concerned authorities and no objection has been raised before the tribunal. The AT held that it is well settled by a category of rulings that while sanctioning a scheme, the right of tax authorities remains intact to initiate appropriate proceedings regarding recovery of tax. The tax authorities concerned is in regard to recovery of outstanding dues, and in the event of a scheme, the tax authorities' right to recover the outstanding tax dues must remain intact. Once a scheme has been sanctioned, as admittedly in the instant case, nothing precludes authorities from recovering its legitimate and recoverable outstanding dues from the transferor or the transferee as provided in the scheme. In a given case, the liability has arisen or would arise or the demand would be raised against the transferor for the relevant period after due scrutiny, assessment, review or determination through a due judicial process, and the transferee undertakes to make payment of all outstanding dues as determined in the aforesaid manner, the scheme cannot be refused and has to be allowed. So the sum and substance is that you cannot stop the scheme. I'm just trying to see whether there's any. Can an amalgamation be granted subject to obtaining of certain approvals like MMDR or Tamil Nadu land reform? What is the effect if approvals are refused? Can amalgamation be unwound? Well, this is a very practical issue which we are facing now. Some sanctions were, yes, firstly, for the first part of the question, yes, it can be made subject to Mines and Mineral or Tamil Nadu Land Reforms, particularly fixation of Ceiling Act, you can do it. But the point is, if you don't get it, you may have to go back and either get the scheme wound up, if not recalled or modified, to at least drop those companies which do not get those approvals. Like if each company is a landholding company and you have 20 companies merging or 15 companies, then whichever the ones you don't want, you can delink from the scheme. Or if it is all held in one company where the approval is and the approval is getting delayed, you can undo the scheme also. Yeah, I think one or two schemes like that practically are still pending. Only thing is that you can't go back to High Court. The provision of 231 say even for sanctioned scheme, you may have to come back to NCLT. Then merger of LLP with company set aside. Now this is a scheme which went from the Madras bench, and an amalgamation of LLP with a private limited company was sanctioned by the adjudicating authority. It was appealed by the ministry before the appellate tribunal. The issue for consideration before the AT was whether by applying the principle of causes omissus, an Indian LLP incorporated under LLP Act can be allowed to merge into an Indian company incorporated under the Act 2013. The AT held that on reading the provisions of Act 2013 as a whole, in reference to conversion of Indian LLP into Indian company, there is no ambiguity or absurdity or anomalous results which could not have been intended by the legislature. Now, what they said was, you can't apply the principle of causes omissus, and there is no occasion to apply this principle. And they were not convinced with the reasoning of the interpretation of the NCLT, and therefore they set aside the impugned order and said the merger cannot go through. Now, just to give a background principle before I take the other two questions which have just come in, the Companies Act 36 permitted the transferor company to be a company within the meaning of this act or not. So an LLP could have been merged in the previous act as a transferor company. But under the new act, the transferor company definition has not been continued from the 56 Act. It only said a company registered under this act. So an LLP not being a company registered under this act, it is not possible to merge a LLP with company under the present act. But tomorrow, if the LLP Act permits merger provisions of LLP Act are notified, even then it's likely a doubtful one, because the LLP Act only permits merger of two LLPs. LLP to company has still not been permitted, though the authority is NCLT. So we'll have to wait and see how the amendment comes through. Then I just have one more question. Have I missed? It gets into a moratorium. 1 second. Where a moratorium under IBC has been imposed, then can the tax or judicial proceeding as alleged debtor continue? More often than not, the tax authorities have refused to suspend the proceeding as they are merely adjudicating. Should the debtor seek an express order from NCLT in this regard? Well, though it's not connected to the topic, what I would like to say is tax adjudication, if it's part of a, when a moratorium is imposed, technically they can't collect the taxes from you. So the point is, if they're still insisting on order, yes, you may have to go to NCLT and get it. But I'm quite sure the authorities, unless it's a stray assessing officer, he would not have known about the law. But you can go and get an order if he passes any such any order as such. Can a scheme be subjected to the happening of conditions other than grant of permits, such as certain other events happening? How does a registrar record the merger as having taken place? Well, the registrar will not record, but you can make a conditional scheme, like if there is any transaction which is happening, subject to the transaction going through. So the last clause which we usually put the scheme conditional upon approvals, yes, you can put whatever conditions you feel, and subject to the conditions, the sanction is accorded. But doesn't mean that because the sanction has condition precedent or condition subsequent not been satisfied, you leave it as such. If they fail, the proper recourse would be to go to the NCLT, apply and say that the conditions have not been fulfilled and recall the scheme. I would request you to see a Madras High Court judgment in the case of it's a Dharmaburi Paper Mills, where the single judge had rejected recall, and they went on appeal and got the scheme recalled. Though I think cost of about 1 lakh rupees was levied by the division bench, still the order of recall was ordered. So in essence, you can't leave that scheme filed with the ROC on record. There must be academically a recall made. So that would satisfy the registration of the record of the merger also having taken place. In a recent merger, I think this is by Abhilash, in a recent merger of a listed company with subsidiary in Gujarat and subsequent to the merger, the GST input tax credit available so and so while trying to transfer the same is not permitted, since interstate transfer is not permitted by GST portal, even though the transfer provisions have no such express. I appreciate, because there's a practical issue. It used to happen when the CENVAT credit also was there, how to take the input credits at that point in time. It's purely a form issue and an interstate authority issue. If it is not allowed, see, your scheme is going to provide for the into the transferee company. It is not going to lapse. But if the two authorities are not accepting, the only way is either to go and get an application filed and get such orders before the NCLT or a writ petition. But then what you have given in the last line is only the practical situation that the portal is not showing. So it happens the same thing for TDS also sometimes. TDS in regard to income tax. I think I've answered questions till now. I'll try to see later a little bit more when I find any pop-up regarding a question. So this was regarding LLP, what I was trying to make, that you can't do it right now of an LLP with a company or the vice versa. Then IT department, this was a case where the income tax came and took a objection that the whole scheme seemed to be a tax evasion exercise. If you see, an appeal came to be filed with the IT department on the ground that the cancellation, reduction of preference shares and the conversion of such reduced amounts into a loan was a tax evasive device and contrary to provisions of section 55. The AT decided not to interfere with the scheme by referring to the Supreme Court decision in Vodafone, wherein the court held that the income tax department is entitled to take out appropriate proceeding for recovery of any tax statutorily due from the transferor or transferee or any other person who is liable for payment of such tax due. This is one more decision which I'm trying to reinforce. The department cannot come and per se say that tax dues are there. The whole exercise is an evasion. No doubt, it's a stray case. We have had cases where, based on objections of the department, schemes have also been refused. You will find one or two when I take you through later. But in this particular case, they felt if you feel there is an evasion, you please go against the respective companies and to try to take out independent proceedings. Having said that, they also, if you see that last line, recovery of any tax statutorily due from the transferor or transferee or any other person who is liable for payment of such tax due. So they left it to the wisdom of the department to go but not interfere with the scheme. No order on merits at the application stage. Now, this would be a very academic point to make at this point in time, because under the 56 Act, the court had the power, High Court had the power to consider whether the scheme ought to be allowed or not at the first motion stage itself. No doubt there were judgments which said that. I think there's another question, but it's not showing up. Anyway, I'll wait. The power under 391 and 394 under the previous act, which is equal to 230 and 231. Generally, when the scheme was proposed under 391, equivalent to present 230, which is an arrangement or a compromise, the court always went into the merits and saw whether it's a fair scheme or so. But the same high courts or the Supreme Court said if it is a 232 now or a 394 merger, they felt that no, this is a commercial wisdom. It's a corporate restructuring. We need not interfere at the admission stage. Let us see at a later stage. That's the same view now taken in this particular case also, because at that point in time, an application, when it was filed for the motion for shareholders meeting and creditors meeting, the tribunal had rejected it on merits. The appellate tribunal said no. At an admission stage, please do not look into the merits. Look at it only at a later point in time. In fact, they went and added the credit. Since the creditors meeting is given at the threshold, and also if you see the second bullet, the last 3 lines alone. Once the company is concerned, approach the tribunal for sanction, the tribunal at the very outset is required to order the meeting to be held for according consideration to the scheme. Then any order of sanction or refusing sanction would be without jurisdiction unless the tribunal has dispensed with calling of such meetings, creditors in terms of subsection 9. It is manifestly clear, this is the finding, that at the stage of calling of meetings for considering the scheme, the tribunal is not required to examine the merits of the scheme, weigh the proposed compromise. Any such indulgence on the part of the tribunal would fall foul of the provision of 230 clause 1 and would be without jurisdiction. The AT held that the tribunal at the very threshold was not required to venture into the merits of the proposed scheme of demerger, which has to be examined only after obtaining the consent of the creditors members with the requisite majority. And then they go on to say, for the proper exercise of jurisdiction, the tribunal, it is imperative to call the meetings or dispense the meetings. And the tribunal failed to adhere this mandate of law to what they said. They relied on a judgment of the Supreme Court in the Core Health case and held in that particular fact that civil or criminal liability of past transactions would also not be an impediment to the sanction of the scheme. So they will be continued independently, civil or criminal liability, but they will not impede the sanction of the scheme. Then there's a question from Bhagwat. Can a corporate debtor file an application under 230 among secured creditors when an application under 7 is pending against a corporate debtor? Well, when an application is pending, you are not barred at all. I would be showing you another judgment when we come to 241, 242, which will be equivalent to this. They said when a 241, 242 is pending, you can't file a section 7 itself. So the vice versa, there's no bar. When a 7 is pending, the CD can file an application. Any judgments to support? Okay, I'll finish Bhagwat first. So there's no bar for you to file an application, Bhagwat. Now for GST approvals, I would request you to see the judgment which you're seeking. As you saw about the income tax judgment, where you saw in the beginning whether a revised return needs to be made or not. A revised return, the same way you must also see another judgment of the Madras High Court. There are on tax benefits which are given in the earlier act for SENVAT credit. I'm not able to recollect, but one judgment which allowed carry forward of losses. I would request you to see the Madras High Court judgment of Pentamedia Graphics, which after the sanction permitted, the department rejected and said that your loss return is completely non-est in law and we will not allow you to carry forward the loss, though the scheme provided for it and sanctioned by the Madras High Court. On a separate application being moved, the court allowed that, and that was the department also did not go on appeal against that. So you can take those analogy judgments which post-sanction have permitted carry forward of tax dues. The same is here, which is the input tax credit being taken to the credit of the transferee company. Then this is I would use the word academically correct and an interesting judgment. No scheme of arrangement can be made with FD holders. Though there is one judgment of the Madras High Court that the FD holders are also a separate class and you can treat them as a class. But this, which finally went to Supreme Court in another case, which I'll be showing you later in the slide. In Morpin Laboratories, the scheme of arrangement with FD holders was rejected because they said a scheme under 391 to 391 cannot be formulated. They said that the 58A, which is equal to 72 and 73 of the present Act, are regulating the deposit holders and you cannot have a separate scheme. They relied on the judgment of the Integrated Finance Company versus RBI, which in fact very coincidentally was argued by me and Bhaskar here, which went up to Supreme Court. The division bench approved the scheme, but the Supreme Court reversed it on appeal by the Reserve Bank of India. FD holders cannot be involved in a 391 scheme. That is what is held. So the word creditors under 230 will not take into account FD holders. That is a substance of this particular scheme. So if you're formulating a scheme, FD holders or deposit holders cannot be part of this. Okay, Hari, well taken. Then the next one, scope to look into valuation report. In fact, this does continue with the same position of law which was there pre-2013. The valuation report in certain situations are mandatory, in certain situations are not mandatory. If you see the appellate tribunal here has held that it is enough if the expertise is looked into whether it is just and fair and reasonable. They also held that it is not required to look into every math of the calculation, but a broad outlook is more than sufficient. Only thing is that there shouldn't be any wide variation in the valuation, and it is desirable that the tribunal need not look into it unless it's shown that there's an advantage which is flowing, or rather an unfair advantage which is flowing to a group of shareholders alone. And in that way, the tribunal is not necessary to look into the mathematics of the scheme, which is in the best interest of the shareholders or the stakeholders. The said question of valuation report, I would also like to add, in certain cases, valuation reports are not filed at all. In those situations, is it mandatory or not? It depends on the facts of each case. In some cases, you may not require valuation report because you may only be using the book value method. So tribunals have, in certain situations, I would rather say high courts have held that no valuation report is required. We will have to wait and see how tribunals develop that position of law also. Then promoter shareholder can file an application. Here the question of law came whether a promoter, director or some shareholders of the company in liquidation can file an application under 391. While answering this question, the positive and holding, the only thing I would like to add here is, if it's a company which has gone into company liquidation, meaning winding up under Companies Act, there's no bar. But if it goes under the IBC, then 29A still kicks in. So while answering this question, the appellate tribunal said it had to deal with several issues on jurisdiction and had to pass an impugned order as to the question, which was already in liquidation because this company was in liquidation from 1998. To resolve these issues, it directed the adjudicating authority to give an opportunity to the appellant so that he approaches the Bombay High Court to ensure that the scheme is before one forum. Because the appellate tribunal had already heard this matter, they said that do not hear this again because the company is in liquidation from 1998. It is better that they go to the Bombay High Court itself. So these are some of the judgments of the NCLAT on this particular topic. We'll come to some interesting judgments of NCLT. Now, this is a very stray case. It's not, with the subsequent slides, you will see that it's slightly different. Reduction of non-promoter shareholders rejected. In this judgment, the Bangalore bench, a capital reduction filed for reducing the share capital of non-promoter shareholders, where the liquidity was an issue, was dismissed, and it was held that it would not be covered under 66. But would be a compromise or arrangement under 230 to 232. Now, this is a very stray case. The bench felt, no, don't come under 66, but go under 230, 232. But similarly, the Allahabad bench permitted a non-promoter shareholder wherein an exit was given to all of them by referring to Sandvik Asia, Elpro, Reckitt Benzinger. It held that selective reduction is permissible under provisions of 66. So predominantly you will find the next few slides also, like the Allahabad bench. The Chandigarh bench also held that when you do such an exit for non-promoter shareholding, whether a class meeting is to be held means it said no. The adjudicating authority allowed a selective reduction of capital and held that there is no requirement to have a class meeting under the provisions of 66. So I'm just trying to compare and show the views of different benches. Then the next one is reduction of preference shares, whether it be in violation of 55. The capital reduction proposed was of preference shares. The RD took an objection to state that the proposed reduction would be in violation of 55, as there would not be sufficient reserves to permit redemption and creation of a redemption reserve. In reply to the said observation, it was submitted that 55 deals with redemption of preference shares only out of profits, which would otherwise be available for dividend or from proceeds of a fresh issue of shares. 66 deals with reduction. Now, reduction, the word uses, if you see, reduction of share capital. It doesn't specifically use the word equity share capital of preference. So it was said that it is governed by 66(1)(b) of the Act. So it was submitted that the option for reduction of preference share capital was opted instead of redemption, and therefore there was no need for any profits which would be sufficient to redeem the entire preference share capital, and there is no occasion to issue fresh shares for such redemption. Now this was accepted, and the proposed petition under 66 reducing this preference share capital was confirmed. Now a similar one, if you see, was considered for not exactly the preference shares but future expenses. Now here you found preference shares. Now the reduction of capital wherein the present and future expenses for brand development were to be reduced and adjusted against the securities premium account. Again, objections were raised by the ministry that the proposed reduction was open-ended and not specific. So the amount of future expenses for brand development was not fixed. It said 66 is not the route, but the adjudicating authority said no, it is possible because they're only going to spend on the brand, though it is not an amount fixed, but it can still be reduced under this provision. Now, dispensation to notice of creditors under 66 in regard to Simpson and Co. This is a matter which is still pending here. The adjudicating authority, on hearing the petition, dispensed with the requirement of the company to issue notice to its creditors. Now here you know that during reduction, a settlement of list of creditors is to be made or the tribunal can dispense. Here the tribunal exercised its power under Rule 36 and granted dispensation because there were enough funds as cash flow freely available for the purpose of payment with the creditors sought for, and the number of creditors was so much. So to settle that list and get a consent may be quite impractical, and the application for dispensation was allowed. Now, this is a very interesting one. 234, we all know, is a cross-border merger. In this Sun Pharmaceuticals case, the NCLT dismissed an outbound demerger. If you read the provision of 234, which I also did after going through this judgment, it continuously uses the word amalgamation or merger alone. There is no word of demerger. Either it's a slip or we do not know that's an intention. Now I can typically do it as a merger totally with a foreign company. Because the word demerger is not used in the section, NCLT dismissed and said an outbound demerger cannot happen under 234. I think this requires an amendment if it is to really serve its purpose. When merger is allowed, why demerger is not allowed? We'll have to wait and see whether the government will amend this particular portion. The scheme of arrangement, now again redemption of preference shares. This is an arrangement which is now pending still before the Chennai bench. It provided an election of option to the equity shareholders, and in this scheme, a redemption of the preference shares without creating redemption of reserve.
வஜி பார்க்க மாட்டாங்க. அப்படியா? இந்த மாதிரி இந்த மாதிரி அதுக்குமே இருக்க.
Sorry, Arvind, proceed.
Steel plant, where it was stated that an application for convening meetings was to be held according to 230. Now, this SJK steel plant was a typical case where preference shareholders were redeemed through a scheme and not through the provisions of 80 capital A of the earlier act. Now, this particular scheme is still pending and the meetings have been completed now. The scheme, though a scheme under 230, the redemption part is also provided under 230. We will have to wait and see, because like the Chandigarh bench and the SJK steel plant, there is also another Cochin judgment. I think I didn't put it here. Kerala judgment also is there at the Kerala High Court, which permits within 391 power, which is equal to 230, that a redemption of the preference shares can also be made through a scheme. Now, the documents to comply with the NCLT rules, this is purely regarding the affidavit. Now, the affidavit verifying the contents of the application was not in accordance with Rule 33(4), meaning it was, I would say, not adequately stamped on a non-judicial stamp paper with regard to the consent affidavits. The tribunal held that if it is not adequately stamped, it cannot be considered for purpose of dispensation. I know it's highly hyper-technical, but our bench was the one who took this view and said that either you must file fresh affidavits or hold a meeting. Then compulsory exit of shareholders on amalgamation. This is a scheme sanctioned in the case of Polaris. The adjudicating authority sanctioned the scheme wherein upon amalgamation, the transferor company was providing a compulsory exit to public shareholders of the transferor. The transferor had just then gone through a delisting process, completed the delisting, had also done unlisted company buyback, but still found certain public shareholders were there. But now the transferor and a transferee which was unlisted was getting merged. In that process, an exit to the shareholder was provided at a price which was not lower than the price offered during delisting. The sanction of the scheme was also made subject to the guidelines of the Ministry of Commerce in regard to the SEZ, because both of them were also having SEZ approvals. So they were asked to take separate approvals. Like Hari asked me earlier whether it will be made conditional. Yes, and also Srinath who asked me about conditional approvals. Here, conditions prescribed are also required to be complied with. Subject to those, the scheme was sanctioned. Now, this was a small company merger. The RD himself applied to the NCLT and said, look, I do not find this scheme as one which I can do it under the fast track process. It is better that meetings be held, because unsecured creditors representing only 2.71% of the scheme had consented, and hence it did not satisfy 233(1)(d), which required about 9/10. So therefore, the tribunal allowed the application of the RD and directed the companies to file a proper application in accordance with the provisions of 230, 231 of the Companies Act, which meant they had to come back to NCLT under the regular provisions. If you know, 233 also says if the RD, for reasons to be recorded, wants them to go to the NCLT, he can do so. That is exactly the power which he has used. Rule 11 and 154 are the NCLT rules. This was particularly in regard to the valuation report. Now, the adjudicating authority dismissed the petition during the second motion due to lack of material disclosures required to be made available as per the provisions of the Companies Act. So here was a case where the tribunal felt that there were no available material properly disclosed in regard to the valuation report. But then they filed an application under Rule 11 and 154 saying that it was a mistake apparent of a clerical and arithmetical mistakes, and placed a fresh report on before the tribunal. The tribunal said this is not just clerical or arithmetical mistakes. This was completely different, and it also dismissed that application for recalling or reviewing and saying that you cannot do so implying that you must only file a fresh scheme. Then the time period for meeting the clear days. In this particular case, the Kolkata bench held it can't postpone a meeting. Here what happened was the applicant said, I have applied on the ground that 1 month's clear notice was required to be given to each creditor as per the company's rules. But because it's not possible, the tribunal that the meeting is to be called in a particular form, let it be held in that form, and it in its discretion. Am I audible?
Go ahead, Arvind.
Okay, because it just showed my internet was unstable, so I just wanted to know whether I was being. Thank you.
Okay.
The tribunal was of the opinion that, as per the provisions of 230, the tribunal is competent to give directions as to how the meeting would be called, held, and conducted. I'm just taking a few more questions. Okay. Does dismissal of an amalgamation application preclude a fresh one? If not, are there any restrictions? No. The grounds for dismissal do not preclude, does not res judicata, unless you're going to present the same scheme. The point is, you need to see what grounds they were dismissed. The grounds, if they're still subsisting again when you file, then it will be deemed as res judicata. If you're able to rectify the grounds on which, I mean, it's very rare it happens because it's more of a commercial activity. But if it is otherwise, we'll have to wait and see the facts of each one. But on a principle, yes, you can file afresh. The courts have given permission with liberty to file afresh also. The next one. The tribunal held that as per the provisions of 101, a clear 21-day notice is a prescribed norm. The applicant relied on Rule 6, which provides a mandatory 1-month notice. However, as per 24.2, 24.2 is the power to dispense with and the timelines granted therein. But the tribunal felt, if you see the last bullet, in view of the provisions of 231, read with Rule 24, the tribunal did not find merit. It said it didn't want to dispense with the 1 month. It said, we have decided the timeline. The rules cannot override the provision. 230 clause 1 is in the Act. Rule 24, 11, 125, 54, all that are in the rules. So the rule cannot overtake the provision and therefore dismiss the application. So this is a scheme which was dismissed for not being in public interest. There was a certain allotment of shares which was being made only to 4 promoters. So therefore, if you see the adjudicating authority, any allotment of shares other than to the original shareholder would amount to transfer of sale of shares. And that would attract applicable provisions of tax. Now, I have not gone through the scheme. It appears like there was a scheme wherein instead of sale of the shares, they were trying to do a scheme where instead of the original shareholders transferring, meaning the transferor company, they were transferring the assets through the scheme. So the income tax department seemed to objected and stated that there is a huge loss to the exchequer. Now this is a classic case where the department came and objected. Like in the appellate tribunal's case of the Reliance case, the tribunal still went in and said, no, this is a case where certain individual shares were neither getting allotment nor bonus or transmission. And if you see the next slide, you will be able to appreciate. They were inclined to agree with the objection raised, saying that 4 shareholders, second bullet, if you see, 4 shareholders were benefiting, who were also the promoters, common promoters between the transfer and transferee. And in addition to the above, huge tax liability was being avoided. The scheme did not provide for also complying with the SEBI takeover regulations. And in view of this, the scheme appears unfair, unreasonable, and not in public interest, and therefore refused the sanction. Ultimately, it's the principle of the bench which counts as to whether it's in public interest or not. Now the Karnataka bench general principles of 230 to 240, it just said, it's a very nice one. It's equivalent to, I would request you all to see the Meher Mafatlal judgment and read along with this. I'm quite happy that the tribunals have also accepted this. If you see, they say that the tribunal shall exercise only supervisory and not appellate jurisdiction. The scheme should not be in violation of any provision or the articles or any provisions of the Act. The scheme should comply with all terms and conditions mentioned in it, and there should not waive or override any statutory stipulation, and also not any other law, violate any other law involved in the scheme. It also held it a settled position of law that companies involved in the scheme have right to evolve their suitable schemes in accordance with their business interest and public interest after duly complying with the M&A and MOA, AOA, however subject to overall compliance. Now the two important words here is business interest and public interest. So there's that need to worry. Then the scope of the tribunal, again, this is another judgment of the Delhi bench. How far the shareholders are the best interest in judges, fully conversant with the market trend. And the tribunal was only doing its judicial part. It is not a entrepreneurial activity of their to examine the commercial wisdom. Second bullet also, it will not ordinarily interfere with a corporate decision. So these two judgments I wanted to place because how the business interest versus the commercial interest is to be interfered with. Tribunals have at least taken two views that they shouldn't interfere. Then appointed date. Can it be linked to an event? Yes. The department came out with a clarification in August of 2019 and said that it can be a future date also. But the RD had taken an objection that there must be a fixed date. It cannot be a future date and cannot be kept open. That was rejected too because it was permitted. Neither was 230 a prohibition nor 232 was a prohibition. And the department had also clarified in this letter saying that it can be connected to an event. I think this would answer a question also asked. Can there be subsequent events, conditions subsequent? Yes. You can make the appointed date accordingly also connected to that subsequent event. These are, and the same way in this particular judgment, can the appointed date be the effective date itself? The RD filed an objection saying that the appointed date is not specifically stated, but the effective date was defined. So you will see that in this regard, the scheme shall clearly indicate as appointed date, which shall be effective, and the scheme shall be deemed to be effective from that date and not a subsequent date to the appointed date. The sum and substances, I've just extracted the definition. If there's no appointed given and you want the effective date to be appointed date, yes, that's what this Mumbai judgment means. The last line I'm going to read, I'm not trying to read the sum and substance, I've already told you. The tribunal satisfied with the explanation sanctioned the scheme. Now, sanctity of general reserve account. Now, here was a case where there was a scheme which was happening in a demerger. They were supposed to transfer it and credit it to the capital reserve account, and they were not transferring any amount to the general reserve. The petitioner companies also complied with the accounting standards and submitted that it is the companies undertook to adjust any deficit arising out of the scheme in a goodwill to be adjusted only in the surplus capital reserve. Adjust the deficit reserve. The tribunal, satisfied with the above explanation, sanctioned the scheme. So the principle coming out is, whatever happens in a scheme, it is to be adjusted only against a capital reserve and not a general reserve. That's the principle laid down, and it has to be done because that's what the accounting standards also say. Now, the same way in accounting treatment, if you see in the Transcargos case, which is also subsequently by the Bombay High Court, clause 12 of the scheme said that the transferee shall record all assets and all liabilities at their respective book values as on the appointed date, whereas the petitioner company adopted the purchase method, that is a transferee company. It was also mentioned that the intangible assets collectively referred to as trademarks have not been recorded in the books of the transferor at all, which means it was not shown at a particular value in the transferor books at all. because you found in the earlier bullet that the transferor was having the scheme done only at book value. This was taken as an objection. The petitioner submitted that with respect to acquisition of trademarks but not recorded in the books is concerned, it was being done under the purchase method, and the transferee could account for an amalgamation either by incorporating the assets and liabilities at their existing carrying amount or by allocating the consideration to individual assets and liabilities on the basis of fair value. Now you will find AS 14, which is referred to in the third bullet, allows the trademarks not appearing in the transferor books to be acquired and recorded . Is there any provision or order which state that post-merger implementation activities should be completed within a particular time period after a merger order? Well, it will not, you don't need a specific order that you want to, I mean, you can put it that all activities should be completed within a period of 90 days, 180 days, or the scheme is not fully operational within 1 year. You can put it. But if it doesn't happen, well, it is the company which is going to face a problem, because then you will have to go for extension of time to NCLT again. So it would be advisable not to fix any time frame. Otherwise, the scheme may face practical issues. Then optional consideration to non-promoters. Now this is an interesting case where the scheme, the transferor and transferee company are getting merged. Now please see the facts. The RD stated that the transferee is issuing redeemable non-cumulative preference shares to the members holding less than 5% of fully paid up capital of the first transferor company, unless otherwise notified in writing to receive equity shares within 30 days. So it was effectively a exit of the public shareholders. In response, it was submitted that the scheme provided an option to such shareholders either to encash their shareholding by opting for preference share or opt for equity shares. This is important. The same option was not provided for the second transferor, because the second transferor comprised only of promoters from the group concerns and hence required no such options. So the tribunal felt it was in the best interest of the public shareholders. So when two companies were merging, wherever the public shareholders or the non-promoter shareholders were there, they alone had the option. The court felt that it was fine to give that. Now, can an objection on valuation be made by the OL? The court felt that this was a classic case where the company was having work of art or paintings. The liquidator was completely getting a different valuation in regard to paintings. The court held that in regard to valuation of amalgamations, it was a highly complex one, particularly where it required technical expertise and also skill. And it also said it accepted the company's argument that there is no legal prohibition in regard to valuation of work of art based on book value method or any other method. So work of art was also considered in valuation, but the OL's objection was not accepted and it was rejected and the scheme also sanctioned. Now I'm coming to my last part in regard to my presentation, which is in regard to oppression and mismanagement. I think effectively I'll have another 10 minutes of presentation. Bhaskar, you think I should finish this, or I can circulate this and take questions? I think I've already overshot my time. I hope.
Quickly take us through some key decisions.
Okay. I'll run fast into this. That should, I think, help. Firstly, NCLAT. So power of NCLAT under 242. I would like to reiterate that the provision of 241 and 397 are slightly molded now. 397 said that the company is carrying on and the oppression is being carried on, whereas past events were not included there. So the judgments under the old act was past and concluded transactions could not be involved, but the event should have been continuous. But the present 241 says events which are oppressive to members. which means it included past transactions also. That's a huge difference, which has also been settled by the NCLAT and other judgments of NCLT also. So 388B was to remove the managerial personnel. There was no equivalent provision under the new act, but the tribunal held 241 and 242 was sufficient, having within its ambit the power to remove the managerial personnel also. This is the one I was trying to say. Jai Mahal Hotels, past and concluded actions completed in 2001, because this was under the previous act, were not open to any challenge by the contesting parties who became shareholders much later in 2008-9. And here in this case, 399 read with 344, as they were not shareholders, they did not have any right, title or interest in the shares. Then grounds for investigation. This is the latest judgment in March. The NCLT should be satisfied under 213 for the purpose of initiating an investigation has been stated. I would request you all to read this judgment more than the principles, because it said under what situation the power to order investigation under 213 can be made. And it also, a similar judgment in another one of Anil Chandamal Singhvi, also the same thing was ordered. It is also, it has to find out whether winding up would unfairly prejudice. And in that context, the power of 242, how to frame an opinion to initiate the proceedings, was also considered. I think this is a 63 Moons case. It starts from here. I would request you to see 63 Moon case also, which was an investigation and a government petition. The next one was also the ILFS petition. ILFS petition was an interesting one. It also added various other provisions. Apart from 241, 242, the issue relating to, if you see the last bullet, the power to pass interim orders under 242.4 was discussed a lot in regard to removal of the board and also the auditors. That was a power in regard to the judgment given in the ILFS case. Auditors. The auditors also, whether are to be implemented here, was decided in the case of Reebok India, and said that even if an investigation is pending under the SFIO, that cannot be a ground, and still the auditor can be implemented as a respondent to the petition. Then power of NCLT to pass order against any person. The Deloitte's petition, which recently also went up to Supreme Court, you would have seen the judgment, the NCLT judgment, which went up to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, while discussing the power under 241, said what is the power of the tribunal for the purpose of interim order and also to fix liability of delinquent directors. It said that the tribunal is not empowered to pass appropriate interim order against the company, but also against individuals and other persons also to cease and desist. So it expanded the scope that it can pass orders against anyone. Then challenging acts after signing financial statements. This is a typical case where if you're party to the, it's a decided case. If you sign the balance sheets, you can't then challenge it. Whether NCLT has power to reduce rate of interest of FDs, 73.4, NCLT said no. The NCLT had reduced the rate of interest. NCLT said no. When the company had originally offered this interest, it cannot reduce the interest rate under 73.4. Then section 45 application under arbitration, is it appealable under 421? The NCLT said no, no appeal is maintainable under 421. 45 has to go only in the manner, if you see the last bullet, it said you shall only go in the manner known to law. This order will not come in the way of moving the appropriate court, which means they'll have to go only to the High Court. Whether provisions can be given effect retrospectively to punish auditor. So this is an interesting case where they wanted to punish an auditor for violation of 140 clause 5 read with 447 for the period prior to the provision which came into force. The NCLT cannot invoke jurisdiction retrospectively. Appeal was filed by the auditor, but there was no ground as such. It just said that since he has acted fraudulently and colluded, only there's material to prove that, only then it can be done. In the same way, in another one, where the investigation can be ordered by NCLT, the investigation is not to be ordered on mere suspicion, assumptions, and surmises. It has to be read along with 424 for the purpose of natural justice, and it further went on to add that ex facie or a prima facie case has to be made out. And only then, the last bullet, you will find section 213 read with 447, a case has to be made out. And if it can be a matter which can be initiated before the special court, then it may also require the IBBI or authorized person under the INB code to file such a complaint. It could also be done so. Then the limitation, this limitation is not about the Limitation Act per se. This was a limitation with regard to the fact you will find an appeal, the second bullet. The appellant company had intimated the respondent that the final decision for transmission of shares will be given to him only upon a court's decision. Now, because time was taken in the litigation, he approached the court much lesser for the transmission. The NCLAT said the Limitation Act would save him because the company had on 30/11/2007 itself written a letter to him. We will not take any action, but we will await the court's decision. Therefore, the appeal of the company was dismissed, and the ground was also not taken while the matter was heard. So, no doubt it's a legal issue. The tribunal, you can take the legal proposition at any point in time, but still there is one more ground under which the appeal of the company was dismissed, and the limitation aspect which was objected to was rejected. When the name of a company can be restored under 252, if the company is a going concern and there are properties, you can restore it. I'll just circulate this judgment, this one. And the Cyrus Investments, I'm not consciously dealing with this because Tata & Sons is quite old and all of us are aware of. But this decision I'm referring to is with regard to the conversion of the public to private. So there, what happens to a press statement was considered in regard to the removal of the executive chairman, and then the general circular having been followed, and you will find in the first bullet, it is mandatory for conversion of public to private company. So the general circular cannot override the substantive provision of 14, which is mandatory for conversion of public to private. So the appeal filed by Cyrus was allowed, and in that also this was considered. However, this order is also under stay of the Supreme Court. Just want to bring it to your note. Whether arbitral tribunal, which is already deciding the claim of claimant, can decide the question of operation mismanagement. Well, in this judgment of the Vipul SEZ, the NCLAT has said, NCLT has said that it's not possible for operation mismanagement to be considered by the arbitral tribunal. Then this was another case of continuation of delay. This is just to bring about what are the meaning of sufficiency of reason, continuation of delay, sufficient cause, all that which is available in the general law have been considered in the context of the Companies Act and the NCLT, NCLAT. That is why I just put this across here. I'm not trying to deal with them. Then this was an interesting case which you must take note of. The nominee got all the shares. They decided that he is not the actual owner of the shares because it has to go to legal heir. But the legal has initiated the 241 petition. The issue was whether, since their names are not there on the register, can they initiate? The NCLAT held yes, even though the name of the nominee finds in the register of members. Still, going by the worldwide agency's judgment, the legal heirs can still maintain a petition under 241. That's a very important judgment for us to note and understand the principle of law. Now, contempt appeal is not maintainable under 421. Again, the same principle as section 45. The contempt petition was moved before the NCLT, but a contempt appeal is not maintainable to NCLAT. It has to go only to the High Court or the manner known to law, the appropriate forum. So the appellate tribunal is held, no appeal can lie to it under 421. Just 2 or 3 more slides. Whether NCLAT has the power to condone the delay in filing appeal beyond 45 days? No, they don't have the power to condone delay, and they dismissed an appeal. Power under inherent rules, just bringing to your knowledge the NCLAT judgment. Generally, under what situation meaning of ends of justice is to be considered. This is one such judgment which will help you to use in the general practice. Whether violation of SEBI regulations can be agitated in a petition under 241? Yes, you can agitate if it results in an oppression. If that violation, the Kirillovka Baroda holds that if they are violative and they are causing an oppression, yes, you can. Whether NCLT can interfere into business wisdom of the company? No, it is not for the tribunal to interfere in the business wisdom of the company. Here was a case, if you find the 241, 242, they are given specifically where when the company petition was pending, it was asked, I think you earlier asked, Bhagwat asked me whether while a 7 was pending, a scheme could be presented. The same way, when a 241 is pending, can a section 7 or 9 be presented? Here you will find the essence of 241, 242, the second bullet, will be defeated if during the pendency of the petition, the operating creditor or the financial creditor are allowed to trigger the CRP itself. The tribunal, while dealing with the matter, failed to notice the above fact. We are of the view that it is a fit case in which board of directors should be allowed to take that decision as to how it will meet its end of paying the liability to operational and financial creditors. In fact, in this particular case, they even stayed the commencement of the CRP process because they were attempting to save by selling certain undertakings. Whether 241 can be invoked against producer companies? No. The NCLAT has held that 241 cannot be invoked for settlement of disputes. In fact, there's an arbitration clause or a conciliation clause under the provision, so therefore they cannot come to 241, 242. Whether NCLT has power to freeze assets of any person, this was in regard to Geetanjali Gems. It was a power given. They considered the power of 339, 340, read it to the also 241, 242, and said, yes, you have the power to also freeze assets of any other persons also. And the appeal filed by the Union of India, because the NCLT had refused on an appeal by the Union of India, the tribunal, the appellate tribunal upheld, reversed the judgment of the NCLT and said you can freeze. And finally, some NCLT judgments are there regarding 433. Just one or two judgments alone, I will just show and finish it off. This is the case of limitation issue. The tribunal left it open and said that the initial stage we will not go into limitation, we will reserve it and see at a later point in time, but can consider at the initial stage only for the purpose of ends of justice, so that it is not lost cause for the petitioner. Then restoration of company with income tax dues. The Delhi bench said yes, the income tax department wanted to proceed against the company because there were certain tax dues. So therefore, it wanted the company to be restored. Therefore, the NCLT restored this company. Restoration of company with immovable property. The applicant said, I am holding certain immovable properties and the company has been struck off. The Delhi bench said yes, based on the judgment in this MA Panjwani case by ROC, where the Delhi High Court had restored it, they also restored the company's name to own the immovable properties. Thank you very much. I think I've taken more than required. I would just complete with the last three questions which have been put across to me. What is the effect of some of the petitioners wanting to withdraw their allegation during pendency of petition and get out on the maintainability? No, the same principle continues. The maintainability is seen only on the date of the application and not later. Even if he withdraws, he is allowed to withdraw. He is allowed to withdraw his allegation, but the allegation can be maintained with the remaining petitions and they can continue still if it falls below 10%. Can NCLT decide on title unlike company law board? Now, that's a very interesting question, Shaji, because I think I had argued this position between May and June. I would request you to see also the Sundaram Finance case of the Madras High Court decided by Justice V.M. Velumani, which deals with the position of law pre-2016 and the position of law post. But if we use the NEPC Micon judgment of the Supreme Court, they have observed that NCLT has the power to decide on all issues, including title, and the civil courts are barred. So, even though that provision in section 111, where resulting relation to all issues of title have been removed, it appears that the tribunal can decide on issue relating to title also. Then there's one other question: what about the liability of independent directors in a 241 petition? Is there any safety provision? Now, in fact, there is. I would say there's no question of safety provision. I would request you all to see, while reading in this lockdown, one interesting provision which I have kind of found out in the, not found out, which I was able to read in this particular lockdown, I should say. Sorry, just one second. With this I should be done, I think. Yeah. Section 286 of the Companies Act, it's a very important provision because while if we remember the old Companies Act Schedule 11, which finds its place in the Act itself now in, I think it's 339 and 340 or so, which is the 542, 543 of the previous Act, relating to misfeasance, means who are the persons against whom it can be proceeded. Now, assuming for a moment, please see section 286. It says that obligations of directors and managers. So, a reading of this provision shows every director can be proceeded for if the assets of the company are not sufficient to pay the liability to creditors. So, applying this principle, the independent director's role has to be seen whether it was only negligence or participation in the event willfully. But that again will be a case-to-case basis. If the independent director has been out a silent spectator, well, they could still be proceeded against for having kept quiet. So I can only answer that on a principle level and not on a absolute ground level for each case. I hope I have answered all the questions which have been put in the chat box. If there's nothing else, and I thank that I've taken and overshot my time, about I think 20 minutes past my time. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I hope that it was quite useful. The presentation will be mailed to HSB by my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Arvind. That was a very comprehensive presentation. I think it's going to be a ready referencer. It's almost like a mini Ramaya, mini Arvind compilation. His amalgamation book, by the way, I think is a very important book for every library to have, because it compiles case laws reported and unreported on almost every aspect of the merger. So it's for those who don't have it and who are dealing with amalgamations, it's a must have book. Besides that, is all the case laws of recent origin in relation to operation mismanagement, revocation. He has dealt with it so comprehensively that this presentation will be a ready referencer for any youngster or any legal professional for that matter dealing with this subject. Thank you, Arvind, for the painstaking effort that was clearly apparent in putting together this presentation. Thank you to you and your colleagues for having compiled this and for you to have presented this in such a clear manner. We look forward to phase 2, to the sequel already with respect to IBC. Hopefully the following week or whatever date is convenient to you, and for taking the time off, most importantly, from your duties as an additional advocate general. I know you're appearing in matters almost every day before the court on video conferencing, etc. I also know you have a hearing in about half an hour in relation to a matter. So all the best, and thanks a lot for joining us and spending your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar. Thank you. Thank you, Hari, for having given me this opportunity to meet HSB and other friends of HSB. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arvind.
Thank you. Thank you.